Hello. Yeah, we're talking about Salvador Dali today. And yeah, his name was super crazy. Okay. All right. Give me a second here. Okay. We're talking about Salvador Dali, the surrealist painter. First thing we're going to do is look at his place in art history, in our timeline. So in our timeline, of course, Dali's life, he falls within the range of modern art movements, which of course we can see there's so fucking many of them because you know, have we have um, record of and whatnot. But he came in during the Dada, when Dada was first starting, and he himself was a surrealist painter. He really um that was his medium, was surrealism. So uh we're gonna zoom in a little bit here. Yeah, so I'll just read what I got here. So Dali sits in a unique spot in art history, and while he's most associated with surrealism, his work inherits the Dadaist rejection of logic and deep use of absurdity. He was the public face of the surrealist movement, despite being expelled by the movement's founder. And while Picasso's work fractures visual space with cubism, Dali fractures meaning with surrealism. With the seismic shifts in the art world in the late 19th, 20th century, Dali was born into a chaotic art world influenced by Freudian ideals and the battle between Impressionism and Post Impressionism. In a world where art was becoming ubiquitous and the focus of art was no longer just the inspiration of the public, but to inspire introspection in an ever complex modern world. Dali stands at the crossroads of three worlds. First, he was the last of the great master realistic draftsmen. He keeps old school technical skill alive at a moment when most of the art was turning abstract. And secondly, he was first to fully exploit media and celebrity. He was one of the very first. He invented performance art, basically. The branding, the mustache, the theatrics. I mean, he had a fucking ocelot, for Christ's sakes. The stunts, the interviews, it was a very curated image. Um, damn it. And and lastly, he was a bridge between traditionalism and postmodernism. That Dali takes classic religious imagery and detaches it from tradition, replacing it with mathematics, atomic science, and dream logic. This hybridization is why he stays relevant long after the Surrealist group collapses. Dali is representative of European modernism, and his art is one of the primary nucleation points for art ceasing to strictly depict reality, to dissecting the modern consciousness of society. So, with that heavy-handed, pretentious bullshit out of the way, we're gonna jump into his early life. So, born Salvador Domingo Felipe Jacinto Dali Domenech. He was the Marquess Domenech. Yeah, I'm not Spanish, so I don't know that one. He was the Marquess of Dali de Putapubol in Figueres, where he was in Figueres in Catalonia, Spain, which was his where he was born. He's born a ghost because he's named after his older brother. Fucking cat. Um, he's named. Cat's messing with my shit here. He was named after his older brother who died 9 months prior. His brother was 22 months old, and he was always told that he was his brother reborn, which really plants the seed of surrealism in his life, because he was never his own person. He was never his own, like he was never told that he was his own. He was always his brother, so his brother and him were insane, and so that kind of shit's gonna fuck with you when you're younger. Right. So he was obviously a theatrical and brilliant child, and like most artists, he was prone to violent mood swings. And by age 6, it was apparent that he was not just a child who wanted to exist, but he needed to be seen. His father, Don Salvador, was a notary and a strict and serious man. and he did not approve of his son's theatrics. They did not have a good relationship. He ended up, publicly talking about how bad his relationship was with his father later. However, his mother Felipa encouraged his talent and was always warm and supportive. And this dichotomy leads to confusion in his life, because I mean, he's got a dad that's saying no, a mom that's saying yes, and two parents telling him he's someone else. Fucking weird. Yeah. No, but what it did was it really propelled him forward. So at age 12, he begins formal lessons with Ramon Pinoche, or Pichot, who was a Spanish impressionist painter and a friend of Picasso's. And at the age of 14, he held his first public exhibition. And by 16, he was working in multiple different styles. He was working in Impressionism, Cubism, Realism, a lot of different things. So he was really branching out and showing how much of a talented child he was. Yeah. So you can't hear Bleach? Shit. Okay.
At such a young age.
There we go. I think I got you now. So yeah, he was incredibly, like you said, he was incredibly active at a young age. And just incredibly outgoing. His life was confusion up to that point. It's like chaos, but he was really starting to become the master of that. So in 1922, at the age of 18, he enrolls in the Real Academia de Bellas Artes de San Fernando in Madrid, Spain's most prestigious art school. While at school, he continued to act eccentrically, and seemingly spent more time working on his persona than his art. But he was undeniably gifted. Everybody there knew he was incredibly gifted. So while at school, he lived in the Residencia de Estudiantes, which I would imagine just means students' residence. But it was at the time one of the nexuses of the Bohemian movement in Spain at the time. There were a lot of avant-garde artists there, and it was where a lot of the avant-garde movements that we put on the timeline, they had some nucleation points there, or at least had some representation there. So it's the crucible that Spain's avant-garde movement was forged. And it was an area that was already explosive, and Dalí was a match that lit the fuse in that scene. And during this time, he becomes friends with Federico Garcia Lorca, who was a very famous poet. He's pretty famous now. Very well-known poet, like I said. And they were inseparable. So now, there's really a lot of speculation as to their relationship. And every bit of media...
it's modern...
Exactly.
Modern day, they have to just, it really is this way. Really? Yeah. Does it have to be? No.
So there is so much subtle there's so much of you can read the media, and the media all makes it sound like they just want him to be kind of like they did with Abraham Lincoln, right? Like they're taking these things super out of context, whatever. Dudes just can't be friends. So, but these guys were friends, and they were close friends. And I have had friends that were very close that I spent all my time with too. And I didn't want to fucking pork them. They were just my homies. And I think that's what's going on more here. So it wasn't necessarily a homosexual relationship. It was just a male friendship, which modern society can't accept on its own terms. They have to imply some level of homosexuality.
Well, when you've got kind of a fraternal relationship with your best friend, that's like, yeah, everybody's going to want to portray it as something that it's not. And it's like, no, this is like my best friend. Yeah, I am going to be able to say and do stupid shit around him that means nothing, but somebody's going to infer just because they're desperate in the modern era, and it's kind of perverse, really.
Yeah. Now, and they could be right about that. Who knows? But
it doesn't really matter now.
It doesn't.
That's the other thing.
No, yeah, it actually does not matter at all. Because Lorca and Dalí were Lorca through his poetry was more versed in emotional subtlety, and while Dalí, with being a more visual artist, really introduced Lorca to visual surrealism. So their relationship is a source of tension, according to the stories. Dalí feared sexuality, so Dalí was not like, they try to portray him as like some like pervert or degenerate or something like that, and he really wasn't. Like, he was a little weird and eccentric, and he was more into some things than normal people should be, but he wasn't fully like, he wasn't like this public masturbator, you know. He did have a lot of.
He wasn't like some British BBC personality or something like that.
Right. But you know, Dalí desires admiration. Like we said before, he wanted to be seen, and he really is enthralled by Lorca's brilliance. So, also during that time, he formed a partnership with filmmaker Luis Buñuel, and where Lorca helped Dalí understand subtle emotion, Buñuel helped Dalí sharpen his intellectual edge. Buñuel was a political radical and sharply philosophical. Together, they developed ideas that become the film Un Chien Andalou, which is considered to be one of the most influential surrealist films of all time. So I have a picture from the opening scene of that movie, and most people, you may or may not have seen it. If you're a fan of the Pixies, you may have seen it, but this is the opening scene of that movie, and it's pretty famous. So it shows, it seemingly shows someone getting a razor blade dragged across their fucking eyeball. But the way
this one. Yeah.
Yes, and the way it's filmed, it's actually a calf's eye, but from the way it's filmed, it looks like, you know, she's getting her eye sliced open. So this was a surrealist film, and it was considered to be one of the most influential surrealist films ever made. I mean, so much so that it keeps getting referenced in modern culture. Like I mentioned, the Pixies, they have a song called Debaser, and it's all about, and the theme or the chorus is, I am un chien Andalusia. Un chien Andalusia means, or Andalou is an Andalusian dog is what that translates to. It is meant to be, at a time when art was becoming super pretentious, this was actually meant to debase art. It was meant to kind of drag art down and show grittiness and dirty reality, in a sense. So between Lorca and Buñuel, that was really kind of the two most formative relationships he had in his childhood.
Mm-hmm.
So, but during this time, he experimented with pointillism, cubism, and among others, while studying old masters. It was a wild and chaotic time in history and in his life, because this was, you know, the beginning of World War One.
The interwar period.
It was, the interwar, nearing the beginning of World War II. There were still a couple of years to it, but it was an incredibly chaotic time in history. So, despite his forays into less representative art, he remained an incredibly talented technical painter, as reflected by this 1926 work, A Basket of Bread. So we're not going to spend a whole lot of time, but I just wanted to bring this up because you can see it is indeed an incredibly, it is a painting that could have been done by one of the old masters. It's a very...
That is very well done.
Yeah. So he has an incredible grasp of realist painting. It was one of the traditions that he came out of. So, skipping forward here. This is another picture of Dalí and Lorca. So as previously mentioned, Dalí was constructing a persona. He wasn't just making art, he was making himself into a sort of performance art. He adopted an elaborate
Mhm.
wardrobe. He spoke with theatrical pauses and just generally acted eccentric. He was working with his reputation as a medium, like brush and oils, to paint the identity he wanted to portray. And during this time, his friends described him as a genius who constantly acted like a genius, or constantly acted like one.
Hmm.
So, following this persona, Dalí began to grow impatient with his instructors because he believed them beneath him, and he claimed his professors are not competent enough to examine me. And this
Hmm.
attitude would eventually lead to his very public expulsion from the academy, which ultimately freed him to travel.
I
So,
mean, being able to not only craft one's persona, which I would presume is necessary for him,
mhm,
given his life prior to this,
right.
but also this kind of adds to the mystique being expelled.
Yeah.
And still being a sought after artist.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this is interesting.
Yeah. So in 1926, he traveled to Paris, where he would meet Picasso. Let's see if I got that painting. That's not it. He would meet Picasso. Get that picture up. There we go. There we go. Okay. So without the constraints of school, Dalí felt reinvigorated, and he would visit Picasso daily in his studio. And at the time, he felt he's quoted as saying, "I'm Spanish, he's Spanish. I'm a genius, and he's a genius. Of course, we'll get along." Um, and while he was with Picasso, during that time, he continued to experiment with Cubism and was dabbling with a lot of proto-surrealism after while in Paris, and then after he went back to Spain. And then when he went back to Spain, that's when he developed his Paranoiac critical method, which is it was what he used to paint. So I'll read what it
Okay.
is. So it was a creative technique Dalí developed to trigger irrational associations and hallucinogenic interpretations while remaining fully awake and aware. He taught himself to see the world as if he were actually paranoid, finding hidden meanings, double images, and symbolic linkages where none actually exist. And then he painted what he saw. So the core elements of his method were self-induced irrational perception, where Dalí would enter a state where unrelated objects seemed connected, transformed, or symbolic. Double images or multiple interpretations of a single form, where a single form could become two or three different things depending on how you looked at it. And then harnessing the subconsciousness while staying conscious. So, unlike automatic drawing or trance methods, Dalí stayed alert and controlled the irrational visions instead of surrendering to them. Kind of like, it would be like a lucid dream. Although I think more modernly people would refer to it as a fucking acid trip. Anyhow, I don't think he was under the influence, but that's kind of what it sounds like. But then also,
it does sound like something where you hear where somebody can create what's called a talpa, where it's like this mental image,
yeah,
and then it becomes alive and whatnot. And it's like he's able to do that without possibly inducing anything else, which is
right,
interesting.
yeah, and I think it's welcome back, Fab Daddy. I think it's amazing that it's an act of genius for him to be able to do that, for him to be able to understand his own mind and his own to understand his own mind and his own process in such a way that he could do this. Then the last part of this method is really revolves around Freudian influence, because at this time, Freud was fucking huge in the art world at this time. Everybody was obsessed with dreams and sexuality and their mother and all this bullshit, and so that's what. So many of the associations that he came up with, they relate to sexuality, childhood trauma, or hidden fears. So,
All of which I'm sure he had in spades.
so this is going to be a longer one here. So in 1929 is a breakthrough year, and this is when he painted his first fully realized surrealist works. These works contain many of the themes that would become recurrent throughout the rest of his life: sexual anxiety, death and decay, double mirrors, among other things. And also Port Legat, which ends up in a lot of his paintings. Dalí rendered impossible dreamlike landscapes in a nearly photorealistic way. And additionally, in 1929, he invites a group of surrealist friends to stay with him in Spain at his house in Figueres, including Paul Allard and his wife Gala. Paul Allard was a surrealist poet at the time, and his wife Gala, 9 years Dalí's senior. She was immediately drawn to him. So Dalí is uncharacteristically shy around women, and she picked up on that instantly. So Dalí is overwhelmed by Gala. She's apparently a very big personality. She sees right through his theatrics and the masks to the real him. And one day, while on a walk near the coast, they formed a connection that would last for the rest of their lives. He realized that she saw through his persona, but did not hold that power over him. You know what I mean? So she saw through to the real him, but allowed him the freedom to be who he was. So, she understood his genius and his fragility at the same time and was drawn to it. So, of course, this came as a huge shock to the circle, not only because of her marriage, but because Dalí was a young 25-year-old man who'd never had a girlfriend in his life and was incredibly shy and awkward around women. And after they met, it was a short period of time after they met that she made her choice to be with him over her husband, which of course was a big thing. So,
Yeah, especially in Catholic Spain.
yeah. But, you got to keep in mind too that these guys were the bohemian communists, kind of the proto-communist revolutionaries of the day.
True.
So they were not about anything traditional. So they really did not like the Catholic
I'm just
thing.
thinking more in terms of from the outside looking in, the other community's reaction is kind of is this more shock value from Dalí?
It could, it could very much be that way. But anyhow, so Gala, similar to Nancy Russell, who we talked about, Charles, with C.M. Russell, Ed Hopper's wife, Jo, or Rosalie Bierstadt, she saw the extraordinary genius and saw that he just needed a little help to reach his full potential. And she understood that he wasn't just an artist, or that he was a brand. And she eventually came to manage his entire career. She negotiated his contracts, controlled his finances, and helped him curate his image. Everything we know of Dalí today is because of Gala behind the scenes, providing support and stability to his life. So by 1930...
And probably ocelots.
Yeah. And ocelots, yep. And cats. Oh, it's always cats. So in 1939, he became the central figure at the Surrealist movement, which was established in 1924 by Andre Breton, who defined Surrealism as pure psychic automatism in the absence of any control exercised by reason. So kind of stream of thought painting. And Surrealism was meant to reveal the mind's raw, unfiltered reality. So while Dalí was its most famous visual artist, he never did fully align with the founder's ideals. And between the affair and his burgeoning commercial success, Breton and many other surrealists who were just typical leftists at the time began to grow wary of his politics. But also during this time, that also begins to form a rift between Dalí and Brunel because of Dalí's fascist sympathizing tendencies. So with that brings us to our very first painting we're going to talk about. So this is the Persistence of Memory, painted in 1931. This is a surprisingly small painting at 9.5 by 13 inches. So most people are shocked. They think this is going to be big. This thing's about the size of a sheet of fucking paper. It's a little bit bigger than that. It's
Hmm.
currently on display at the MoMA, Museum of Modern Art in New York.
Mhm.
And so while this painting contains layers and layers of symbolic meaning, we're just going to focus on the main themes here. So the four main obvious things that we can see. So the melting clocks, which are it's a iconic Dalí thing, even though they don't appear in a ton of his paintings. But the melting clocks, like everybody knows melting clocks. This is one of the most famous paintings, probably, from a modern artist. I think a lot of people have seen this. So the melting clocks represent time as a psychological concept instead of a mechanical one. The collapse of rigid structure, uh, the collapse of the rigid structure of the clocks shows a softness in time and memory. And the clocks defy physics, the softness of the chronology and rationality, because they're all pointing at different times.
Hmm.
So, I mean, you would presume if they were all in the same place, they'd be in the same time. Anyhow.
Yeah.
So, it's his challenge that time is objective in dreams, or that time is objective, because in dreams and memory, or subjective, because in dreams and memory, it bends, melts, and persists in irrational form. So I have objective, I meant subjective written here. Anyhow. So,
Hmm.
they're meant as an introduction of the breakdown of the physical world. The sleeping fleshy form is a distorted self-portrait. It's Dalí's dream self. So the softness belies the vulnerability of the unconscious mind, and the fluidity of identity, because you can see this is a kind of a moist, fluid form that's just kind of emerging from the ground there. So down here in the corner, there's ants on. This is the only clock that's not melting. So the ants represent death and decay. And also, Dalí had an incredible fear of insects. So they represent fear to him as well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
And so their presence on the rigid clock, it kind of represents the decay of the mechanical time. As the ants kind of consume rationality while memory erodes. And then lastly, the dead olive tree represents sterility. Of course, an olive tree in traditional art represents fertility, and a dead one represents sterility or spiritual desolation or a loss of wisdom. And so the tree, and you can see the tree has just got a clock there, and it's barely able to support the weight of time. So between all that, the scene is also a conflict between rigid surfaces and melting objects. There's hard angles with the rocks and the geometric shapes in the foreground, and then the softness of the coastline in the background. And again, that coastline is his hometown, which appears in many of his paintings. It's meant to be a part of his hometown. So the image is that of a dream that has already ended. Everything is empty and silent. It's like the liminal space after a dream collapses before you wake up. That's kind of what he meant to represent here. So, like I say, we might get I said before the episode to Bleach, like this shit might get a bit pretentious. And that's kind of, you kind of have to be a little pretentious to analyze some of his art sometimes.
Yeah, well, given his persona that he crafted,
yeah,
it makes sense where it's like, oh yeah, it's going to be using these $10 words to paint a picture that's very simple that you could get for 75 cents.
right.
But it's interesting more to me on a technical scale. Just like like the background with the play of light and dark and shadow and reflections and all that. That's very interesting to me.
Yeah, and
it's like
the points the horizon points all go to the same place. So if you follow the lines of the horizon, they do converge. It's and it goes to show how much of a technical draftsman he was as well, because he was very technical when he laid out his painting, similar to Hopper, but not as obsessive. So we'll move on to his expulsion from the art movement. So in the 1930s, the Surrealist movement's members became increasingly outspoken Marxists. Breton, the founder, expected ideological loyalty, as most leftists do. But Dalí didn't give a shit about their politics. And while the commies became obsessed with commie stuff, as commies do and are wont to do, Dalí painted images with Hitler. So this one here is a 1939. Okay, so I'll just keep reading here. Not as an endorsement of the man or his politics, but just because of his symbol of fear, repressed desire, and subconscious obsession, and themes which, like, he would have likely been exposed to pretty heavily because of his proximity to rabid Marxists. You know,
Well,
much like the Trump derangement syndrome of the time. Of course, maybe
also,
rightly so or not rightly so, who knows? But there was the same people about everybody back then. That's nothing new.
well, and this is also the time of the Spanish Civil War, which there are some very interesting historical parallels between then and the modern world.
Yeah. So anyhow, Dalí was more interested in Freud, whose ideas dominated the age, dreams and authoritarian imagery as psychological material. Breton found Dalí's use unacceptable, and when he demanded Dalí explain himself, Dalí simply replied, "Well, I am surrealism," which pissed Breton off, fucking enraged him. They ended up having So then in 1939, this is the painting we're looking at here. Dalí painted this painting titled The Enigma of Hitler. And this was prior to his expulsion from the movement. So as a full rejection of their commie nonsense, Dalí embraced money, fame, commercial projects, and publicity. The Surrealists, in typical commie fashion, believed themselves to be some vanguard of revolutionary cultural movement. But which, I mean, it's what they always do. And Breton labeled Dalí as Avida Dollars, which is an anagram of his name, kind of to mock him, you know. But Dalí didn't care. He fucking loved it, and he leaned into it. He embraced that and all their insults. In 1934, they had a struggle session called the Dalí trial, where his insistence on them being spazzed over Hitler made Breton like officially disassociate with them then. But he kept showing up because fuck those guys. He's Salvador Dalí. He does what he wants. But in 1939, go ahead.
Wasn't Breton like a hardline Stalinist for a while?
Yeah, he was. He was a rabid Marxist. So in 1939, he wrote a decree, quote, Dalí, in his obstinate refusal to align with us, with the revolutionary foundation of the group, can no longer be considered one of us. And they kind of officially kicked him out of the movement then. And in response, he kind of shrugged. He was like, okay, whatever. Like, it was getting close to World War II time anyways. So he fucked off to America. Him and Gala left to America. So while on their exile in America, so with the commies being dildos and WW2 war ramping up, Dalí and Gala came to America, where he immediately enjoyed commercial success. Obviously, he worked across all artistic media. He worked in painting, advertising. Hollywood fucking loved him. In 1945, he designed the dream sequence for Alfred Hitchcock's movie Spellbound. And he also worked with Disney on a project called Destino, would not be released until much later. And that was a short surrealist film. And during this time, despite his commercial success, which was he was exploding. He felt guilt over his expulsion because they were his friends, but then also he worried that he was drifting too far from serious art, and not, just commercial bullshit. And he needed a way to invigorate his work. And that came in the form of what is called nuclear mysticism. The atom bomb had profoundly affected his work. Oh, nice. And it affected his work and his worldview, and he began wondering about the hidden structures of reality. He became fascinated with the relationship between science and spirituality, and he believed modern Christianity could be fused with modern physics. And in 1948, feeling a draw for home, he visits his Port Legat where he grew up, which I'm probably saying that wrong, but that's how it's spelled. It's probably Yegat because it's 2 L's. So,
I mean, it's also Italian Spanish, so it could be
a bunch of things.
Completely different. Yeah.
So this is him and his wife at working in the studio. Of course, he's got a crazy phone because he's Dalí and he's got to be weird. So that brings us to our next painting, which is the Madonna of Port Legat. This was in 1949. It's 49 by 37 oil on canvas, and this is currently located at the Dalí Museum in Figueres. So the painting represents his turn to nuclear mysticism, as he called it. The central figure is Gala. It's his wife. She's a representation, obviously, of the Virgin Mary. And this shows his kind of full return to Catholic imagery and marks the beginning of his religious phase. So Gala as a Virgin Mary represents her place in the axis in his universe. She's the center of his universe, but also he's emerging the holy and the divine with personal to show her as his gateway to the divine. So the broken floating scene represents his fascination with atomic theory, and shows the scene composed of fragments or particles. So everything is not connected. It's all out in space on its own, but it's still cohesive. And it shows the universe is held together by invisible forces. Now, the floating Christ child shows divinity is not bound by physical law. He's not touching anything. He's just floating by there on his own. And then the arches represent the gateway to the divine, showing that he believed the sacred to be revealed through structure, not chaos. And of course, the scene in the background is his childhood home, Port Legat, which is where she's, that's why it's called that. So this represents kind of his reconciliation with his Catholic roots and his total break from European surrealist ideology, because they had become, of course, there was no they didn't appreciate religious imagery in the surrealist movement, and definitely not traditional imagery of any sort, which this represents. No. And there's a lot of things in here that are, aside from the, what we talked about, there's also the seashells and the fish and all that stuff, which is, symbolic of Christianity and Christ. So
one of the things in Catholic iconography is the use of a seashell for the baptismal font.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of a neat little homage there that he's doing, and it's kind of fascinating how it's like a reverent and irreverent image all at the same time.
Yeah. And speaking of reverent images, we'll move on to the next painting here. And I think this is probably one of my favorite paintings of his. This is called The Christ of St. John of the Cross. This is a huge painting. It's 81 inches by almost 7 feet tall, 6 foot by 9 inches tall. And it's one of his largest painted works. It's towering piece currently located at the Gallery and Museum in Glasgow, Scotland. Art Gallery and Museum in Glasgow, Scotland. And this is one of the most visited art pieces in all of Scotland.
I can see why.
Yeah. So it was inspired by drawings made by St. John of the Cross in the 1500s that depict Christ from above, which is an angle rarely used. You never see that. It's like the God's eye point of view.
Yeah, and I find it interesting, just reading ahead a little bit about the depiction of the crucifixion devoid of nails, blood, and a crown of thorns, because according to Dalí, he was convinced in a dream these features would mar his depiction of Christ.
Yes. Yes. So, like you said, there's no blood, no crown of thorns, no wounds, because he believed the traditional agony of the scene obfuscated the real metaphysical truth of the crucifixion. Christ is depicted as perfect and unearthly in a hyper-realistic fashion, hanging above the earth. And the scene uses golden ratio proportions for everything. So it introduces mathematics into it. Also, Christ is arranged in a triangle and the cross is a triangle visually, which are also meant to represent, the
The Trinity.
Yeah. And of course, at the bottom, we see the boats and the fishermen down here. Those are always apostolic. Gosh dang, I have struggled with that fucking word all day long. Apostolic images. And again, the peaceful scene, the background is the Port Legat. And so this painting, we're going to look at a few more things about this the detail on Christ on this painting is so phenomenal. The intricate detail that he put into this painting, I think is really beautiful and takes it shows the care that he put into it. So the sky, the fishermen, all that stuff, it's supposed to be an encompassing Christian image. Now, also another thing is there's light, but there's no clear source of the light, meaning that he's illuminated by God. The shadow, there's a definite light source, but you don't see it very well, and it's not all encompassing. So I believe it's kind of like God's shadow falling upon him. And but anyhow, so it was an intensely religious image, and it was rejected, although it was rejected by some critics of the time for being too traditional. It really solidified Dalí's rebirth as a religious artist and kind of marks the peak of his mysticism phase. So
yeah, it's kind of an interesting change in his life. It just kind of this progression where he's going with the surrealist, which is very the real world, all of this very quantifiable, and now he's getting into the metaphysics of life closer to the end of his. It's just a fascinating little transition.
Yeah, and he was in his, he's in his mid-40s at this point, painting this stuff. He had plenty of life to go, but he was definitely getting older, and more serious and more introspective. So with that, we're just going to hop over to the next one here, the next painting, which is this crazy, awesome thing. So so this is called Galatea of the Spheres. It's 22.5 by 21, and this painting is currently at the Dalí Museum in Figueres. And it is the masterpiece of his nuclear mysticism phase, where he merges portraiture with his atomic designs. So obviously this is his wife Gala, and she's represented as a a series of particles here, and it's an ordered sphere, or I mean, it's an ordered cube that you can see, but there is a bit of chaos to it.
Hmm.
So, of course, the references to the atomic are obvious. This is particles flying all over the place. And Galatea was the name of a nymph uh, sculpted by Pygmalion and brought to life. And in this image, Dali is sculpting Gala as the embodiment of harmony and cosmic beauty. Um,
Hmm.
and despite the fragmentation, you can tell by her eyes she maintained a calm and serene look, belaying the
Hmm.
softness in her face and form. And it's kind of a Renaissance style. I mean, it is. It's a Renaissance style portrait that's mixed with his modern medium. So his mixed with his atomic physics, his ideals of that. Of course, you can see there's a lot of motion in the picture, but it does seem she seems very peaceful, very serene and stable. So in
Hmm.
this painting it's really meant to show Gala as a stable force in his universe. So
Interesting. Yeah, it's just kind of a really cool, use of kind of showing on an atomic level, kind of this assemblage.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's fascinating how well you can make out the face, how well you can even make out the expression. You can see it's all there, just hidden in the particles, hidden in the invisible connections behind the scenes.
Hmm.
So with that, we're running a little early actually. Um,
Good.
we're gonna jump to our very last piece that we're talking about, and this is the disintegration of the persistence of memory. And he painted this in 1954. So this is 10 by 13, so it's nearly identical to the original one. And it's located at the Dalí Museum in St. Petersburg, Florida.
Hmm.
So this is a sequel to his 1931 masterpiece. However, it's not just a sequel because it really does show uh, his evolution in his style and the metaphysics, his a metaphysical revision of the previous painting. Um, and it shows definitely his obsession with the atomic form. As the scene is
Hmm.
dissolved in the particles and the solid world is fragmented and falling apart. And then the water is rising. We can see the water rising out of the bay, rising up on the branches of the tree there, coming more towards us than it did in the previous one. Uh, it's
Hmm.
showing that it's representing the fluidity of memory, and while the clocks they return as a far less prominent manner than the first, showing that time is fluid, but it's less of the focus now as physics kind of supersedes psychology. Uh, so now
I'm just looking at the little building blocks, and it's this tying back into his fascination with the nuclear age.
yeah, I mean he he lived through the bombing of Nagasaki, and it, like many people, it affected him profoundly at a deep, profound level. And as a gonna sound lame, as an artist, though, he was uniquely. I think he experienced it in a different fashion than most people do, just because he himself experienced life in a different fashion than most people do. um, so the one thing we'll notice here, the one time the face, it's kind of morphing into a fish-like entity, um, which
Yeah.
is showing his transition to a more Christian figure, I believe. Um, his transition to Christianity is represented by his subconscious form becoming more like uh, the fish of Christianity.
Hmm.
So, and again, this is the scene, the port we got in the background. Every one of his paintings that
Yeah.
we've talked about today has had that in the background. And this painting is a statement to counter his earlier painting in 1931, where the first painting was talking about how dreams shaped reality, and this painting is meant to say how reality shaped his dreams. Um,
Interesting.
yeah,
Huh. And a little off topic, but I noticed the evolution of how he signs his paintings with the dolly down there in the foreground
yep,
and the center.
yeah,
Interesting.
and I mean, in his signature, like anything else, was very much a part of his brand. So,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, reaching for his youth. That's a very good way to put it. He could have been doing that. So we're gonna jump. We're gonna do one last slide talking about his later years. Because I love this picture. So throughout the remainder of his life, he would continue to create and create paintings and showpieces. He appeared on TV, collaborated on films, designed jewelry. But these were the years where he cemented his persona as the Dalí we know him as today. Um, that he carried forth that persona. And in the 70s, he returned to Spain to establish the Dalí Theater Museum in Figueres. And as he aged, Gala became a more dominant force in his life. And similar to Joe Hopper, she was his greatest source of joy and misery. She was a miserable, mean bitch. She was a controlling, nasty woman by most accounts. Um,
Hmm.
she was a horrible, horrible wife that he loved with all of his heart. He could not have loved her more. So,
That poor bastard.
right. And he remained fully devoted to her until her death in 1982. And
Hmm.
her death sent him into a spiral, which he would never fully recover from. In 1983 was the last time he painted anything. In 1984, a fire in his bedroom left him very badly burned and
Hmm.
bedridden, which really eroded his health. He had locked himself into he established that Dalí Theater Museum, and he ended up isolating himself there. And after Gala's death, he just lost it. He couldn't deal. Um,
Hmm.
So in 1989, on January 23rd, he passes and he's buried at the previously mentioned theater museum. And in the end, Dalí lived and literally died within his own work. And he was a boy haunted by dreams, and became a man who rebuilt his reality according to it, symbol by symbol and atom by atom. The persistence of memory made him famous, and the disintegration made him profound. And Gali made it possible for him to make himself immortal. So that's what I got. That was Salvador Dalí, folks. We are running a little quick on that one. This
Wow.
was,
I mean,
yeah,
for such a pretentious artist, we definitely we drove through him pretty quick.
yeah. Dalí was going to be. He had a lot of shit that he was going to do. He's incredibly relevant in culture. He was going to be Emperor Shaddam in Jodorowsky's Dune. Oh, that would have been so awesome.
Oh, that would have been really fascinating.
Yeah. And like you said, LGM, he'd managed an absurd amount of money. He was a capitalist. He wanted money. He liked money. That's why he had quote unquote fascist sympathies. It wasn't because he had fascist sympathies. It's because he had anti-communist tendencies. He and those came in the form of his love of money and art and performance and commercialism and expressing himself. He was a man who was driven to share himself with the world, and the best way he felt to do it was to create a persona for the world that he could share. So
Well, I find it kind of it's almost like it comes full circle with his over the top persona is really a reflection on the damage done in his youth by his parents.
yeah,
And that's kind of that weird, like, all right, I'm going to become the most iconic version of myself that I can to spite that upbringing.
right.
That's kind of a fascinating turn of events,
He
and
did.
definitely one that nobody knows who his barely 22-month-old brother would have been.
Right. So that's what we got today for you folks. Thank everybody for coming out. Got Fab Daddy and Fab Daddy LGM, and there was a new person that hopped in, Amy Elizabeth. Thank you for joining. Adrian
And
Gonzalez on your channel. So
yep, I'm happy to have a new viewer, and yeah, we can always end it on his particular favorite image, just because I'm a kind benevolent dictator from time to time. From time to time.
We will be back next week to talk about Andrew Wyeth, the American realist painter. He did Christina's World, among other things. He did a great job of capturing intensely personal and meaningful scenes. And so join us next week at same time, same place, where we will be talking about Andrew Wyeth. And for now, I've been Dave, Total Blackout Painting. And
I've been Bleach Steven, and this has been Autist Circle. Remember, get out there, look at some art, and doesn't mean you have to give into what everybody says art is. It's yours. Keep it that way.
That's right. And that's it. We'll see you next week, folks.
Cheers.